You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast that showcases the research currently being conducted at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law in Freiburg, Germany. My name is Christopher Murphy, and I'll be sitting down with researchers to talk about their projects, the various methods they use, and how their findings have impacted legal, criminological and psychological research in Germany and abroad. All this and more on Doing Time, Talking Crime. Welcome back to Doing Time, Talking Crime. Today's episode is actually the second part of my interview with Patrick McClanahan on his research and data collection for the Department of Criminology's Virtual Burglary Project. In the previous episode, Patrick discussed the aim of the project, the advantages of virtual reality, and the challenges that data collection in a prison environment can involve. Now it's onto the virtual world that the participants experienced, as well as the preliminary findings and some of Patrick's personal reflections. Patrick, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, our last episode ran a bit longer than we'd expected, but again, that's just because we've got so much content to talk about. So let's get straight to it. Tell us about the virtual environment that you created for the inmates to traverse.
Yeah, so just as a reminder to the listeners, the virtual environment we created was designed to really assess how the environment can influence a criminal's decision-making. And with this design, we can test a number of theories. So that was kind of the model, if you will, the theoretical model pushing the design. But instead of having just one neighborhood that these inmates would walk through, we opted for two different virtual neighborhoods. Both neighborhoods were inspired by real-life neighborhoods, but not designed to mirror them perfectly. And that's something that we wanted to make sure of because we wanted the inmates to know that they could have never walked down the street and they never can again in the future. So they feel like it's all, quote-unquote, not real for that instance.
Okay.
And they don't want to act like they're committing a crime. They don't want to act like they're reenacting a crime.
And this was, so you would look for something, I mean, your prisons, all four of them were in Pennsylvania, so you were looking for something that would look like a
city or an area in Pennsylvania that would be somewhat familiar and generic across the whole state, which is very difficult because Pennsylvania is both large cities, small suburbs, as well as very rural areas.
And your inmates could have been drawn from
anywhere.
You had no idea.
I had no way of knowing. With all the prisons that I was in, which again was across the state, sometimes a prisoner will get sent to a prison locally. Sometimes they go across state for whatever reason. It could be a number of reasons outside of their control. But what I did is I and one of my collaborators, Dan Nagan, were both very familiar with Pittsburgh. And so we decided to use Pittsburgh as our kind of area of inspiration. And what I did is Pittsburgh has a great interactive crime tool where you can look at the number of crimes reported in a geographic neighborhood by crime type. So I picked the two neighborhoods with the highest crime type for a set of years. I can't remember what years it was at the time.
For burglary.
For burglary specifically,
okay.
Yes. I then got the random streets that made up this neighborhood, went to Google Street View, dropped myself in the middle of these streets, and then spent days and days and days walking, quote unquote, if you will, through these neighborhoods.
I'm impressed with your ingenuity. This is brilliant.
to understand what an average house could look like, what type of architectural features they share, what type of architectural features are different, what the streets look like, what the road signs look like, what color the street signs are, what material the sidewalk's made of, what are familiar things that create the environment around a neighborhood, you know. So, for example, here being in Freiburg, we're surrounded by the Black Forest and the mountains. If I put mountains in this neighborhood, is that going to be very weird for these people? It would be, depending on which part of Pennsylvania they're in.
Yeah.
So really kind of knowing, quote unquote, their potential home.
Okay.
And this actually worked with quite a lot of success. A number of participants would say, oh, this looks like Germantown, which is actually in Philadelphia, not even in Pittsburgh. Or, oh, this reminds me exactly of my home street. Oh, this looks like my baby's mama's house on the corner. These are all things that were shared with me, so I felt very confident in that we did have a high degree of believability and realism in this neighborhood design.
Okay, and this neighborhood, when we say neighborhood, that's the design is a suburban neighborhood.
Kind of like outskirts of city, maybe. I wouldn't go as far as city center because you don't see any large buildings. Something that you see often in the Pittsburgh, Philly area as well, and maybe even places like Harrisburg. They're not row homes because they're not connected, but they're very tall, narrow homes.
A terraced house.
Yeah, so they're not terraced housing, but they're very...
Sorry, that might be the term I know.
No, exactly.
Right,
but one of the, one of the features that I found was an American four-square house is very popular, which is literally just 4 squares on 2 different levels, and that makes up the house. Okay. And so we've learned what houses are familiar in that area, what houses repeat. And this is very important for the design of the neighborhood, the technical aspect, if you will, because we don't want to have to create 60 unique houses.
I see. Okay, just simply from
scratch,
from a manpower time issue.
Yeah, manpower and time issue that will take several months just to create that many unique houses. So we find houses that we see repeat throughout multiple neighborhoods, and then we just change specific features about them. Okay. So that's kind of how we went about designing these neighborhoods. Now, the first neighborhood, we wanted to examine how very specific features about a particular house could influence the attractiveness of that house as a target, how attractive that house is to break into, how likely you would break into that house if you were there, that type of thinking. Okay. And so we did this by creating a neighborhood with 60 plus houses. 4 of these houses had a specific thing manipulated about them that we know from the criminological literature that influences criminal decision-making, either making the house more attractive or less attractive.
And, 5 of these houses had this...
4 houses had the manipulated feature. Okay. 1 house was our kind of control reference house that didn't have a manipulated feature.
And so, the other 55 houses were...
filler houses, just to make it look like a full neighborhood. Because if you had in one little small street with only 4 houses on it, it just isn't as real. It isn't as engrossing.
Okay.
So we created this full-looking neighborhood, but they only answered questions at 5 houses.
About 5 houses, right?
Yeah. Okay. 1 house having nothing manipulated about it as our reference or baseline house. The other 4 houses having something manipulated about it that we could then compare to the control house, our baseline house. Because, as I was saying earlier, we chose houses that shared architectural features. The 5 houses that they answered questions about are identical. They're the same shape, size, same style, same yard, same grass placement, same flowers. Now, the only thing that might differ is it might be a dark red brick and a light red brick, just to kind of make it seem a bit more natural that way. The only difference was the one thing we changed.
One single feature which you changed. Okay.
So then when they're answering the questions at all these houses, because they're answering the exact same question, we can reasonably conclude that the reason that there might be a difference in the answer to the question at the house that we've manipulated with the house that's the control is because of what we manipulated. And that goes back to what I was talking about in the first episode, and having that high degree of control and experimental manipulation from a lab study.
Okay. And so the participants, they don the headwear and are asked then to walk around the neighborhood, check it out, if you will, to burgle.
I gave them the specific instructions.
Sorry, this is for neighborhood number 1, right?
Yes, this is just for the first neighborhood, correct. Yeah. Okay. So participants were instructed to explore the neighborhood for burglary opportunities, essentially.
And how do they move? Can they walk, or do they kind of point to somewhere and zap to?
So we use a standard game console controller. Okay. So just with 2 joysticks that they just push in the direction they want to walk. And obviously anywhere they look and turn their head to, they have 360-degree field of view. Before we put this in the neighborhood, we did do some practicing, some trial runs, so they got comfortable with how everything worked, including how to answer the questions, because that's where all our data came from, is what the answers they were, what answers they provided to these questions. And so we wanted to make sure they were comfortable in answering the questions, because this wasn't a survey that they answered afterwards. These questions appeared in the virtual reality instantly, right there in the moment. And so we got their thoughts right there in that moment.
You would then allow them to have a walk around the neighborhood first, and then prompt them to please go to house number or...
So it was a little bit more organic than that. We wanted to make sure that they felt free to wander as they would normally if they were looking for a house to break into. So I told them, and they practiced this before we went into the real neighborhoods, that whenever they were ready to answer questions, to look for the green arrow. And there would be a green arrow floating in front of one of the houses, and underneath the arrow would be some orange footprints. And when they were ready to answer questions at the house, they go, walk over in the virtual world, stand on the orange footprints, and then the questions appear in front of them, kind of like a note card, like a big note card. And they would pick their answers on a scale from 1 to 7 for all the questions, just by looking at the number they would want to pick. That number would illuminate, saying, hey, you picked this number. And if they were happy with that, they would click the next button by looking at the next button and go to the next question until they were done.
Okay.
And then they would go, then that arrow would disappear, those orange footprints would disappear, and then they would see another one somewhere else in the neighborhood.
So that's pretty much, it was random then which house they visited in which order. They could decide entirely themselves.
So they had to go into one of 2 orders based on where they started. The randomization actually is a bigger research issue, if you will, with VR studies. You kind of get into a big technical nightmare there.
Okay. So they could walk around and then say, I'm ready now to answer a question, and I go to the arrow. And then that kind of sets off the chain of events.
Yeah. So we randomize it by they either see it in order A or order B, essentially. Okay. But when they start in the neighborhood, they can go explore the neighborhood as much as they want. They can answer the questions whenever they're ready at their own pace. So they do have that freedom.
And some obviously spent longer having a wander. Maybe you're looking at the clock going, guys, the next interview coming up.
Next interview's coming up. I would have some people in there upwards for one neighborhood, 45 minutes to an hour. Okay. On average, most people were done in 15 to 20 minutes. But so to really show you how there was one gentleman I remember, he had been in there for quite some time. And I was kind of concerned. And again, like you said, looking at the clock, like trying to make sure they feel like they're important, but also managing my research time. I just kind of say, I'd choose not to interrupt them, but I would ask them, hey, are you okay? If it had been, so I asked him, hey, are you okay? And he screamed in fear because he forgot I was in the room. He was so engrossed in the environment that he forgot I was in the room.
Okay, and so that's why you generally give them the rundown beforehand, because during the study, when everything kind of goes as planned, you're not involved then, and you stay out.
Generally in the study, I kind of give them their space while they're in the virtual neighborhood. What I do encourage them to do is to think out loud while they're walking around. So when they're walking around and they're having any thoughts, I tell them, whatever your thought is, say it out loud. I'm going to write it down. Then afterwards, we're going to have a kind of interview about what you said, and you can explain it a little bit more to me. And so that's the extent that I was involved with them when they were in the virtual neighborhood. Okay. So it was kind of up to them to tell me when they were done.
That's right, okay. All right, so that's neighborhood number one. We have 60 houses, 5 of which you're kind of really interested in, 1 that's your base house, and 4 that have been tinkered with or manipulated. I guess we'll return to exactly some of the manipulations used a little later on. What about neighborhood number 2? What was different there to neighborhood number 1?
So for the second neighborhood, rather than looking at individual houses like we did at the first, we had the thought that, neighborhoods are more than just single houses. They're the whole ecosystem, if you will. They're all the houses combined, they're the surrounding area, they're the people that walk around in the neighborhood. It's the quote-unquote vibe that the neighborhood gives off. So we kind of wanted to take this idea and create another neighborhood, but this time focusing on how the whole neighborhood would make you feel about breaking into a house there.
Okay, that environment.
That kind of, why would, kind of getting down to the question, why this street, not that street, rather than why this house, not that house.
Yes, okay.
And so that is why we designed and manipulated the neighborhood in that way, with the idea of we're not changing houses, we're changing the whole neighborhood. And so why this neighborhood looks attractive and why this neighborhood looks unattractive. So that's the key difference there.
Okay. You'd like to then know from, they would walk through different neighborhoods, though, the participants, or would they just be given one neighborhood to walk through?
Right. So this was in science terms, a between groups design. So the second neighborhood, they went through one of potentially 4 neighborhoods, and it was randomized which one of 4 they saw.
Okay.
So they didn't go through all the different versions. They just went through one of the 4.
Right. And each neighborhood you had structured differently then?
Structured differently. Okay. But again, what's nice about the virtual reality is the only thing that differed was things that you would say are not related to a house. So if you took away the street, the sidewalk, and you had all the houses floating in space, they were all the same across all 4 neighborhoods. Okay. So it was kind of the surrounding vibe, the surrounding public areas, if you will, that actually differed between the neighborhoods.
Did you have avatars walking around the neighborhoods?
So yes, we did have avatars walking around the neighborhood.
And driving or
yeah, so there was lived-in factors, it didn't feel sterile. And that was the case, and that was the case in the first neighborhood as well. We didn't have avatars walking around, but we did have cars driving through on pre-designated paths.
Felt lived in both neighborhoods.
Lived in, and obviously something that you don't really think about is sound. We have just kind of what we call neighborhood ambiance, if you will. So wind, some birds chirping, some people talking in the second neighborhood. Because you don't see anybody in the first neighborhood, we don't have any people talking because that's, where are they type of thing. In the second neighborhood, they have people talking.
Did you program them yourself, or how did you go about that?
So I had a very helpful team through the Institute. We have Peter Wozniak, who's with in-house, a great programmer. And then we have also a third-party contractor, Marco, who's very involved with the project, kind of the lead on the development side of things. And I learned a lot, we'll call it that. I got very comfortable with it. My kind of experience of developing this virtual environment was, I always give the example of you don't realize how wrong a perfectly aligned trash can looks until you see 30 of them down the street. Because nobody puts their trash perfectly at a 90 degrees.
Aligned. That's right.
To take a trash can and then place it in the neighborhood, then type in some random angle on its correct axis so it and to do that for thousands of objects. Gosh. Trash cans, Coke bottles, flower beds, basketball, scooter, tennis shoes, hat, porch furniture, cars.
So a bit of time went into constructing the neighborhoods.
The number of hours of just what we call placing objects, because these are the things that make a neighborhood feel lived in. You know, if you walk down the street, there's no cars, no trash cans, no plants. It just doesn't look right. Power lines. Satellite dishes. Sewer grates. Cracks in the sidewalk.
But that was obviously then advantageous then to have your Google map kind of street view there.
For example, the street name signs where I'm from are green or black and white. In Pittsburgh, they're blue. And I only knew that because I went through Google Street View. One thing that I did not know, and this you wouldn't necessarily know unless you were very, very tuned to it. So I did think as far as for every car to have a Pennsylvania license plate. But in Pennsylvania, you don't have front license plates. You only have back license plates. In Virginia, where I'm from, you have both.
Yes.
We put license plates on the front and the back. And
did anyone call you out on that?
One participant did call me out on it. One participant said that was the weird thing, that he had never seen license plates on the front. But those are the tiny details that really, really matter to make someone feel like, oh yeah, this could be where I'm from.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Wow. And thought of, I guess we kind of think of this kind of sterile neighborhood, but no, you're not creating a sterile neighborhood. You're creating very much a lived-in, I mean, real as possible.
Moss growing between the cracks of the sidewalk, I would place. And I do have to really thank Marco for this. We had one meeting where we essentially looked at a still frame from a neighborhood, and he pointed out all the things he saw. And because he has a lot of experience designing these neighborhoods, and they were just upwards and bounds more than things that I would really take in. And again, these are the things that we don't necessarily ever register that we see, but if they weren't there,
you'd notice
by the hundreds, you'd be like, something's wrong. This doesn't feel real.
And of course, all that work you've put in, the grunt work kind of thing, where finding so many people, participants, and 4 prisons, you want the project itself to also sit right. I had a question, which was for our listeners in particular. I mean, you've had a wealth of experience now and asked a lot of questions. And I know not all the results are in. Well, the results are in, but you haven't finished analysing it all yet. But you've got your 2 neighbourhoods, and some practical advice might be interesting for our listeners, myself included, about how would you make your house or apartment less attractive to a burglar?
Well, I mean, I think you've kind of summarized the practical advice right in that question. The less attractive. That's really how you have to think about it. And by that, I mean, don't advertise what valuable goods you have. Don't advertise that you just bought a new TV. You know, if you bought a new TV and you have that big cardboard box and you just put it out in the trash, that signals to people you bought a new big TV.
To passers-by,
And maybe they don't want your TV, but that also shows you have money to spend. So if you're going to do things like that, buy something very nice, and you're going to have a big box sit outside, break the box down, put it in a black trash bag, tie the trash bag, don't let people know what you have. I had some inmates during their interviews would say some of their best times to break into a house was a couple of days before Christmas.
Yeah, I've often heard that around the holiday,
Because you have everything boxed up nice right next to a window. And so they don't have to go far for it. And they would say the next best day is a couple days after Christmas, because now they can walk down the street and see what everyone bought. You got the MacBook Pro laptop box, you got the new gaming system box out there, you got this sitting out there. So now I know essentially a shopping list of things that you've bought. So take your time, break down your boxes. I know it's annoying, especially if they got all those staples in it, but by putting that out there that way, you're simply advertising what you have to be taken.
Recycle thoroughly.
Recycle thoroughly, correct.
Good for our German listeners to be like, yes.
Exactly. One way that burglars assess this type of do you have something valuable to take is the condition of your property. How clean it is, how well maintained it is. The kind of infamous saying of, if you got money to spend on the outside of your house, you got money to spend on the inside of your house. This would come up so often that I finally broke down and asked a couple inmates. I said, look, nobody wants a dirty yard. No one wants a beat up house. So what would you suggest? Like, if they're going to, and they would say, if you're going to have nice things, have a security system. If you're going to spend money, thousands of dollars on landscaping. Spend the same on a security system. Because they do work at the end of the day. For the large majority of burglars, if they see a camera or something that indicates a security system, that's enough to make them want to go somewhere else.
Okay.
They want the path of least resistance.
Okay. So that could be as a camera or even stickers.
Stickers, that's actually a big one. Inmates would often say that, even if they just saw the little sign that says this house is protected by insert security company here.
Yeah.
That would be enough for them to go look somewhere else. So if you're going to have nice things, at least do the other end of that stick and really protect your house with security systems. Mm-hmm. Where I would go a little step further is no one goes in through your front door. Just to be clear, let me be very clear here. Yeah. No one breaks into your house from your front door.
Mm-hmm. What's the trick then? Through the windows? Back windows or back doors?
It's going to be the places that people aren't going to be able to be observed and the places you're not going to think. So if you just put window sensors on your front-facing ground floor windows, no one's going in through that way. Mm-hmm. Put the security system on your back door. Put the security system on your basement door. Put a security system on your basement windows. Guys bigger than me told me stories where they would break in through those little, whatever basement doors or basement windows, and there's no security system down there.
No, okay.
So the front door, while great for a security camera, is not really going to be their point of access.
Gotcha.
So it's not just about having security, it's about having security in the right place.
In the right place, okay. So attractiveness, so obviously well-maintained yard is not necessarily a positive, but if you then secure it,
yes.
Okay. What about cars and things like that? Is that one of the, I guess I always think, the guy's got the Porsche here or whatnot, the Ferrari there.
Yeah, so guys, it is another indicator of wealth. Mm-hmm. It is another indicator of the chances of this house having something valuable to take. Again, it kind of comes down to that same logic. I'm not telling you not to own a Porsche or a Range Rover.
Oh, good.
But if you're going
to sell my collection.
But if you're going to, close the garage door. Mm-hmm. Don't leave it open.
No, yeah. Okay.
For the same reason that, a lot of inmates would focus solely on tools. Circular saw, blow torches, all these things that are, 100, 150, 200 things a pop.
Yep, easy to be sold.
Easy to be sold.
That's right.
Don't leave your garage door open. Mm-hmm. Don't. Just close it whenever you're not there.
So in many ways, common sense, right?
So again, because you're advertising directly what you have. And not only do I know what you have, I see it. I see it right there. And I see that there's no alarm or it's not locked up or anything. So the same thing, if you're going to have a nice car, park it in the garage. Close the garage door every day.
Okay.
A lot of people think, I don't want to open and close. It takes you time. The number of burglars, as if you remember in our first episode, I talked about how we wanted to speak to experts and non-experts. Something that both experts and non-experts said was the number way they get into a house is how lazy humans are. Mm-hmm. You leave your door unlocked. You leave your garage door open. You leave the window cracked because you're only going to be gone for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And then
it doesn't take
that time. It doesn't take 10 minutes to get in and get out. Yeah.
It doesn't take 10 minutes at all. So don't fall prey just from being lazy in that way.
Okay, sure.
We say approximately 90% of burglars don't want anyone to be home. So that usually means targeting houses that are likely to be empty because of the time of the day, so like during the working hours.
Yeah.
Or if they have inside information to know they're on vacation, such as you posting on Facebook that you're going on vacation. So don't do that. No. But they will not just guarantee it. They will still check. They will still check to see if you're home. And there's what we call an occupancy check. They can either do this by knocking on your door loudly, real loudly, repeatedly, to ensure that you're not just asleep or something like this. So if you, for example, someone knocks on your door and there's someone you've never seen before, and maybe you built the house and you're the first owner, and they say, oh, my friend Chris used to live here. That's a lie. Don't make it a thing. Just make a mental note of this person because and then if a week later someone's house got broken into, could be related. I'm not saying to do anything outlandish, but that is one of the most common ways to determine if someone's home is simply knocking on the door, and if they do answer, coming up with some bogus story.
Okay.
And so just don't think of it so nonchalantly.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So things like when we have like lights on timers and whatnot, this is also, I guess I would consider common sense, but these are practical.
These are practical to give the illusion that someone's home.
That someone's home.
Yeah.
Right. So basically a house that's lived in, not necessarily an overly attractive target. They're looking, it's difficult to say, generalize, of course, but it's what we're looking at, or burglars are looking for is Let's say least resistance, and that's not running into an occupant.
Right, not running into an occupant, because both. That'd be a whole nother episode of what they consider when they go to that. Because now we're talking about home invasions, not burglaries, and that's
right. Yeah.
Even if it's an quote unquote accidental home invasion because you didn't know they were home.
What did you find anything which surprised you as far as what you might have thought was something that would be a reason not to burgle a house, which actually turned out to be, for some burglars, reason to burgle a house?
There's a couple of things. So one that surprised me but doesn't necessarily make a house more attractive, and then another one that surprised me that can make a house more attractive. So I'll tell you about both. The first one is dogs. People always want to know, I have a big dog, a big scary dog. Is that going to deter a burglar? Not necessarily, because it's not the big scary dog. It's the loud, yippy, ankle biter little dog. Most burglars believe if a dog is barking at me, if I go to the front door and a dog runs through and starts barking at the door, all they're going to do is open the door, step to the side, let the dog run out, walk in, shut the door behind them, and now the dog's outside. Okay. And now I'm safe.
As in a big angry dog? Okay, yeah.
The dog that doesn't stop yipping and yapping is just as annoying as an alarm going beep, beep, beep. And so people are like, why has that dog been barking for an hour straight? I mean, they wouldn't be an hour.
Yeah. Okay, so that's right. So it's not necessary. Well, okay. I mean, Rottweilers, I'm never going to want to mess with those. But
and that's why it's not a perfect science. That's why I'm like, it's not necessary. But I think the thing that all burglars unanimously were kind of indicating is attention. They don't like attention. Okay. Yep. And a dog that won't stop barking will bring a lot of attention.
I have to research breeds of yuppie dogs now. Yeah. Chihuahua, here I come.
Exactly. And then the second thing that really surprised me, and surprised isn't the right word. From the literature, it was kind of a path to see, can try to hypothesize about that, if you will. But the extent of how clean it came out really surprised me. And this is even speaking anecdotally right now, but particularly in America, we have the idea of gun ownership preventing crime. Mm-hmm. The idea that if I'm a burglar and I believe this homeowner is armed, I don't want to be shot. So you don't want to be shot. That you want to live.
Back to rational choice.
Back to rational choice. Yes, exactly. However, for some burglars, if they believe you own a gun, that's a big ticket item, easy to sell, worth lots of money, and now you've got exactly what you want. One burglar would always say, "Guns, money, and gold. That's all I went for. That's all that sold." And so if you somehow advertise that you own a gun, while some burglars might be deterred by that, other burglars might be very, very intrigued by that.
Actually drawn to the house because of the fact that you're advertising your Second Amendment rights.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, a lot of people say, well, how would they know? And I ask burglars this question, like, well, how do you know who owns a gun? If you had a lot of hunting targets in the back, if you had a truck with a gun rack in the back, they said very, very unfortunate. They recognized the biases that they were observing, which I found very interesting. But they said anyone that indicates that they would be ex-military, either through flags or something like that in the yard, that they might be likely to own a gun. And so they're using that same type of bias and generalization and observation to find the items they want. So it's very important, again, not just advertising what you have or don't have, but also maybe what type of signals you're putting out there that might be attracting people to break into your house.
So if I do no maintenance on my house, have no security system, don't mow the lawn, this sounds all very good. Drive a beat-up old car, am I safe?
No. Very unfortunately. Very, very unfortunately. Because, and this is why I always choose my advice, and I always try to sandwich by saying in general. In general, because there will always be these exceptions that for some reason they would prefer your house, and because they think for some reason you're the type of person that's going to have an item that they want. Okay. And the best thing you can do outside of your own home is to know your neighbors, to really develop a culture of when I'm not home, I know my house is being at least checked in on here and there. And then I know that if I'm not home and someone sees somebody in my window that they've never seen before, that they would feel comfortable calling me at least and say, hey, are you expecting somebody?
So there's something to be said then for those kind of neighborhood watch programs, or the idea, as you say, to
I don't even know if you have to go as far as an official neighborhood watch, but the idea of having a neighborhood that is a neighborhood, that they, maybe no one's out patrolling the streets or things like that as a neighborhood watch, but everyone kind of knows everyone, everyone's friendly, they have maybe neighborhood barbecues every once in a while, and you know the kids run around and they know each other's parents and things like that. We just have this in our literature we call it collective efficacy.
Okay, was that something you were also able to touch on the second one where you had different types of neighborhoods? Was that where you were also able to get information out of that? That
was a big kind of the big cornerstone of that study. I haven't got to look at the data at all of that, but it is something that was mentioned in the interviews with these inmates, that they said, you know, this type of neighborhood looks like the neighborhood where everybody knows everybody.
Okay.
Or this is the neighborhood where nobody knows anybody. And that was something they considered.
And that would be reason to burgle or possibly think
avoid.
Or avoid about,
Some people say, you know, I couldn't walk down the street without someone being like, who do you know here? For better or worse?
Yeah. Okay, right. Well, okay. So a little bit of advice, but I'm still, so there's obviously a bit of luck involved as well, though.
There is a little, it's like the age-old adage of, I don't have to be faster than the bear, I just have to be faster than you.
Yeah,
that's right. It's unfortunate that if someone is that motivated, they will find the most suitable target. You just have to make yours, as we said at the very beginning, the least attractive.
Okay. Did you have motivated burglars in your in the study where you conducted hundreds of burglaries?
Yeah, you have to take some of these numbers with a grain of salt, because if you do the math, you're thinking you were very busy. But yeah, so I had people that, even though they were arrested for burglary, didn't consider themselves a burglar, and we would talk about that crime, and then it was like, okay, yes, you were not there to steal something you were doing. You even had a key, but it's just what the arresting officer wrote down in the moment. All the way up to people that, you know, were specialists, that had all these insane techniques, that knew all this extra, like, so hundreds, thousands of burglaries in their lifetime. Yeah, I remember one participant in general, he would just walk down a street and go into open garages. And so if you have a neighborhood of 50 houses and 17 are open, he'd hit all 17 just walking down the street.
Okay.
And he said tools was his main thing, because they sold anything that also indicated like dirt bikes or all-terrain vehicles or things like that.
And he would hit them and have a car parked by where he would kind of dump the goods in there and then
pretty much
continue along.
Because
you can't walk down with Santa's sack, obviously.
No.
Yeah.
So,
and they were quite open about talking about, well, some of them, because of generalization as well, but some of them were more than happy to talk about their expertise and their skills.
Some of them were more than happy to talk about it, and very, very open to talk about it. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about in our first episode of creating that environment where they feel safe to really talk about these things, where I'm not judging them, where they know that I'm not looking at this as good behavior or bad behavior, but looking at it as behavior. And I tell them it's behavior I don't know, so I'd like to learn from somebody that does know. So yes, people were more or less open, some very, very, very open.
You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast by the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law. Okay, well, right, and I can imagine you're only going to get more information then once you go through the remaining results about what exactly. And the one house which you tinkered with there, is it possible for you to say, for instance, what you might have changed on some of the different houses there?
Yeah, for sure. So for this first study where we focused on the differences between houses, as a reminder, I said we have our control house, our baseline house, where there's nothing changed. We then have the 4 houses where we've manipulated one key feature that we think would make a house more or less attractive to break into. One of the houses was surrounded by high shrubbery, so high hedge work, and the idea being that this would break sight lines, so they were less likely to be seen by anybody that happened to walk by or just a neighbor looking out their window. Another house did have a big empty TV box sitting next to the trash to indicate that they just bought a big TV and therefore might have something valuable worth taking, the TV or something else.
Yes.
One house we did have a gun rights advocacy sign on, touching into this idea of guns being both very valuable and very desirable, but also a deterrent. In another house, we targeted occupancy by having a car parked in the driveway to indicate that someone was likely to be home.
Oh, okay, right.
So very clear, very clean manipulations that were really tapping at a clear underlying decision-making factor.
Yes, okay. And then you could kind of, when you were saying, is this house attractive to burgle or not, then you'd be able to work out from the way that they have looked at the house or what element, because you're not asking exactly why this house is more attractive to burgle than others, right?
Right. So that's something that kind of comes out through the thinking out loud that I was mentioning before. So they might offer that information on their own will. But what we do see is because we're asking the exact same questions at all 5 of those houses. So if we look at the house, for example, with a car parked in front of it to signal occupancy, and then we compare the question that says, do you think someone's home right now? If we compare the answer to that question to the answer of the same question on the control house, where that element isn't there, that would tell us, okay, does this move in the way we think it will? Does the perception increase like we think it would from the control house? And then we can say, how does that relate to their attractiveness or the willingness to break into that house?
Okay, right. So from based on what you've kind of said so far, shrubbery makes the house more attractive to burgle?
Yes, because it's harder to see into your house.
That's right.
And that goes for fences that are completely, there's no space between the pieces of wood. So if you want a fence, have some spacing, or go for a chain link fence that can easily be seen through. And if you have a bunch of high trees or high bushes that make it where if you have a house that's low to the ground and windows that pretty much go down to the ground, especially basement windows, and you have a very overgrown bush right there. Not only have you provided access, you provided cover. So if you're going to have a bunch of things providing cover, cut them back, maintain your bushes.
Okay, right, okay. And occupancy is clearly important as well.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, some takeaway for the listener as well there. I mean, I guess some of it's common sense. If I hear about it, I think, okay, but again, as you say, maybe it's things you don't. I don't know. Just think about it. I mean, when you're going away, you sometimes prepare your house. Obviously, I got the lights going on and whatnot. But do I break down that TV box or not? Maybe I don't think about that. And of course, And I think that's why the inmates were very free and open to say it's because humans get lazy. Because exactly what you're saying, when you hear these things, you're probably thinking, well, that makes sense. Well, that makes sense. Well, that makes sense. Or if I'm specifically thinking about, I'm not going to be here, I got to do something. But but that's right. My day-to-day life.
But if I'm just going to the store for 20 minutes, I'll leave the garage open.
That's right.
I'll leave the front door unlocked because someone's going to be coming in any minute or something like that.
Okay.
So it is a very common sense thing, but it is about doing it consistently and not providing that opportunity to reduce attractiveness.
Yes. Okay.
But if your house gets broken into, don't call me.
I'll call you though if I have to keep mowing the lawn. And be like, it was Patrick's fault.
Yeah, I'm not an insurance company. I can't help you there.
And when did the burglars, from what they said, or because obviously they were actually telling you about the attractiveness of a house, so this would only have been in the post-VR interview where I talked to them about what people go for. He said guns, jewelry, gold. Common bit, I guess you got very different burglars looking for different things, power tools, TVs, console. Well, TVs maybe a bit too bulky, right?
Yeah, the TV was kind of an amateur move, a lot, in the sense of talking about amateurs or experts. A lot of the experts would say, I'm exactly what you said, I'm not going to walk down the street holding a TV.
No, that looks a bit dodgy.
But there were some people that would say they would take the TV.
Okay.
But I did notice it for the guys that reported less burglaries in their lifetime. But guns, money, gold, that was a kind of a repeating thing.
Yeah.
Some people swore away from guns because of the legal consequences it came with. Again, this is all general. There's not a hard rule that, everybody wants this thing. If someone found $100 sitting on the counter, I think everyone would take that.
Yeah.
So it's same thing with that classic change jar that you have sitting in your house when you walk in. A lot of burglars would say you don't realize how much money that is, and that if you hit 3 houses and they all have one, it's a decent amount of money.
Oh, okay. I thought that would have been an amateur move to stake the pennies, but okay, fair enough. Yeah.
A lot of times these days, people are staying away from electronics because they realize that they can be tracked pretty easily, where they have something identifiable. A lot of people are now staying away from game consoles, video games in general, and going more towards the high value ticket items or things that are always wanted, like a TV. You kind of have this big divergence.
Right, yeah.
There is a very niche market of documents and things that you could use to steal someone's identity. So passports, birth certificates, social security cards. These are the things that you just need to have locked up as best as possible.
Which probably the least of us, myself included, do. You have lying
especially
around,
if you travel often, your passport's probably in a very accessible place.
Yeah.
What's very interesting is, and this is from other research that we know, Claire Nee, who I mentioned in the first episode, who's kind of one of the heads of the Virtual Burglary Project, if you will. She has demonstrated in her research pretty continuously that burglars, particularly on the expert side of burglars, have a routine or measurable path of how they enter a house, what route they take, and how they exit. Starting with they enter through, wherever they enter through, they do a quick scan of the ground floor and immediately to the master bedroom, because that's where the jewelry is. That's where important documents are going to be. And then they kind of work effectively down the house in that way, and then out the same way they came in.
Out the same way.
The exit and entry kind of varies depending on the house. That's why I try not to put too much stake into that. But the idea of how they behave once they're in straight up to the quick scan, master bedroom, back down.
I can just imagine breaking into this kind of...
Can you?
Yeah. No, but is there a rush involved there for some of the burglars or some of the inmates that they like? I mean, you're going into the unknown basically. You're like, and you don't know what you're going to come out with. Yeah. Could you sense that at all when talking to them?
Again, this is all anecdotally from my time.
Sure.
with
No,
them.
no, absolutely. Yeah.
So when you say rush, I guess there's two ways I hear it. The first way is what I think probably most of our listeners thought when they said it, the idea that this is an excitement, a rush that I enjoy, and I get something almost like a gambling high from it.
I guess that was maybe what I was heading towards. Is there, like...
For some, that was definitely the case, especially the ones that seemed to be... There was a small group of people that I remember very vividly that were, I would classify as an expert, that would say that they didn't even need the money anymore, but they just enjoyed it.
Well, okay.
And then there's the idea of a rush as just pure adrenaline that isn't necessarily a good thing. No one necessarily went in and didn't have their heart pounding.
No.
So I would say everyone felt the adrenaline rush. For some, it was a factor that they enjoyed. And for others, it was a factor to manage. Because if the adrenaline rush gets too high, that's when they start making mistakes, they would say.
Okay.
And so it's like they have to have an ability to manage that excitement, to manage the heart rate, to stay focused and not mess up just because it's now game time.
Okay, yeah.
Almost like a professional athlete. And that's where, when we were saying earlier, like, it's, if I do this, if I do that, and I do this, am I safe? And I have to say no. Because there's going to be people when that's what they're getting out of it, how do you deter excitement? Because the excitement is the act.
100%,
and so it's difficult to do that perfectly.
Yeah. Wow. Very, very interesting stuff. I can't wait to hear the rest of your findings there. I mean, as I say, we're only scratching the surface here. But I would also like to ask you a few, I guess, personal reflections from your time in the prisons and running this study. Would you have done anything differently if you went to a 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th prison?
I think the first thing that jumps out to me is I wouldn't have done it alone.
Okay.
It was a very demanding experience. I actually remember, and I think I mentioned Professor Cushnet in the first episode, how she was very kind to mentor me on a couple of things. And when it got kind of closer to the point of me going to America to collect the data, we had one meeting and she said, well, how many of you are you? And I said, it's just me. She said, what do you mean? It's just me. She's like, I would never do it alone. Okay. And now I understand why. It's taxing. It's very exhausting. You do kind of have to mask, if you will, because you are hearing sometimes horrible things.
Pretty full-on stuff.
But I can't react.
And you can't react, right? I
can't bat an eye. And that takes a lot of mental and emotional energy. And to do that 5 days a week for 5 to 6 months was exhausting. Okay. I would have either not done it alone, so I could have kind of shift work, alternate days with someone else, or I would have done less days a week for a longer period of time. Okay. If I had to do it alone. Yeah. So essentially, what I would have done differently is better navigate the kind of mental toll that it takes on you by reducing my continued exposure in either having someone else join me or doing less over a longer period of time. Okay, because when you talk about mental toll, obviously, I mean, you're not from any of these areas yourself, so you are living in a motel or a hotel. I'm not sure what the Institute spotted for you, but you were really on your own a lot of the time then, this whole 6 months. Right. Yeah. And it's hard to establish a routine because you're constantly picking up and moving as well. So a lot of the things that you consider a routine of just your daily life, it's hard to replicate that when you're living out of a hotel. And then when your work is being in a prison, you're again cut off from a lot of things. So it's even more difficult that way. So yeah, living out of a hotel for that long is pretty exhausting, especially when it's just uninterrupted. It would be nice to have, like if I did it for 3 months, then took a month, and then 3 months and took a month. Right, but kind of remind myself that there is other life. Yeah, sure. As you say, like to chat to someone at the end of the day who's on your project and working through, hey, what experience did you have today or whatnot? Yeah. Did you touch base much with the Institute during that time, or were you really on your Pat Malone? It was consistent, and I think, obviously at that point we also have the time difference, so it's also difficult to get in touch, like on a face-to-face thing that often. And it was one of those things where if you didn't hear from me, it was probably for the best. Like everything was going well. Everything was going smoothly. But no, I did still feel like I had a connection to the Institute. I still had like I said, John Louis was able to visit me for a couple of days and see the prison in America and sit on the project. So that was very nice. but it is a very isolating experience. There's no other way to sell it. It is a very isolating experience. I do have to pause and reflect, is that because I created a situation that was the only way it was going to be, again, by doing it all myself? Or is that what everyone feels when they do that? Because I do have colleagues that do research in prison, but they probably also have lectures they have to give other days. So they have days interrupting it to remind them of normal life.
It was really that 6 months in one hit, Yeah,
exactly.
Which was probably to be avoided next time.
To be avoided. And it's also just kind of really illuminated a lot of things about research in general for me, in the sense that in the future, I'm going to have a very hard time doing research that isn't in a prison. Even though I've sat here and talked about how exhausting it was, how draining it was, how mentally tiring it was, how demanding it was, the idea of just doing an online survey with 1,000 people, now I truly see where its place is, and it has a very important place in criminology, very important place. But I do believe there's also something to be said for speaking to people that really know what they're talking about, putting boots on the ground, if you will. Yeah. And so that's something that I will always work to continue to do in other projects as best as possible. But it's not something you can do for every single study. There is a feasibility aspect to this. But I
understand what you say, that has piqued your interest then in learning more about conducting research in prison.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was there anything that you were surprised about that went particularly well, or equally that didn't go at all as planned?
Yeah. I was actually surprised about the lack of interruption during the project, in the sense that I was only turned away from the prison on 2 days in 6 months, where I would show up and there would have been an incident or something that they wouldn't have allowed me in for. Okay. Probably just pure luck, but again, surprised about it.
Okay.
Because
you'd heard otherwise, or you?
I have previous experience in my undergraduate degree doing some similar work with juvenile offenders at the time. Often you'll show up on a day and either have an hour delay, 2 hour delay, or something like that, or maybe not even get in. But for example, one of the days that I wasn't allowed in the prison was because they were doing a shakedown or turnover, if you will, of the area that I was going to be in. So that's essentially where they go through and look through everything.
Yes.
And so they weren't going to allow me in that day, and that was just random bad luck. So how well it ran, to be honest, was very surprising. We always make a joke. It's prison. It's going to go, something's going to go wonky, something's going to go weird. Yeah. But it other than just the longness of it and how demanding it was, it ran rather smooth. Okay. I have to think that has to do, one, with my forethought and working with the administration at each prison to kind of have this kind of will of next participant, but also establishing the connections with the correctional officers on the day of that would really help run things smoothly for me.
Sure, that's right. If they kind of take a liking to you and realize, okay, hey, you're in here, you're not messing around here, you're not wasting anyone's time, we're going to help you out as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I do have to, send my thanks to each prison that helped and each person in the prison that really orchestrated it for me, especially on the day-to-day interactions. There's too many to name, but
sure, okay. Well,
very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. And what went catastrophically wrong? Did anything? Or did you think it out so well that there was you had no major issues in that regard?
Say wrong or catastrophically wrong.
Well, that surprised you that really was like, oh man, I hoped that would have gone differently.
Probably the recruitment for the first 2 prisons could have been better, and that's why I changed it halfway through. Overall, though, I'm very pleased with how the project went. Nothing's ever perfect, so I'm not going to sit here and I'm sure there are things that I would have changed or would have wished I would have done differently. But as of right now, I'm in ignorance. Bliss.
Yeah, wonderful.
Blissful ignorance.
Well, that gives me a good pause to ask you, are you proud of what you've achieved?
Yeah, I'm very, very proud. Immensely proud even. It wasn't an easy task at all. Both administratively, getting the legal paperwork coming from Germany to go back to America for work and things like that. I won't bore our listeners with that. To organizing, the hotel stays, the rental car, to organizing which days at which prison, to informally organizing with every CO that worked that day, and staying on top of my other duties here at the Institute during the time. It was a Herculean effort, and I'm not one to pat my own back, but this time I will.
Yeah. You're right. Blow your own horn there. No, for
yeah.
sure. And as I say, I mean, what really fascinated me was the way you had to build up that rapport with both prisoners and prison guards. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. It's not something you can learn from reading a book.
No.
Building up that type of rapport. You can learn from watching and you can learn from doing. And it's just one of those things that until you do it, you don't really understand all the nuances that come with it because you have to be constantly aware of every little signal you're giving off in these interactions.
Yeah, that's right. And then I guess one false move can kind of ruin an interview or ruin your day even. I mean,
if I give off a signal to a participant that I'm judging them, then they might shut down and I might not get any more data from them. If I give a signal to a CO that they've annoyed me and made me mad, and then they might only call for the inmate one time, and if the other guard on the other end doesn't answer in 3 rings, they might hang up.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and if I always frame it as every inmate that comes and does my study, I'm giving them the service. I see me as a service provider and them as the consumer. So if I treat it that way, that means everybody that has to leave my study session needs to be a happy customer. Yeah. Because they will review me.
Yeah, that's right.
And the next person coming in, they probably know or is going to pass on the way in and out.
Yeah.
And so you have to really make sure no one leaves with a sour taste.
Okay.
They don't have to leave with glowing reviews, but you're going to get into some very deep, sometimes nitty-gritty discussions hearing about these people's past that might make it very hard for them to talk about. And you want to make sure that when they leave with a favorable impression of you.
Okay. Yeah, certainly. Okay. No, I think you can be immensely proud of what you've achieved there. I mean, it's just listening to it. It's pretty full on and clearly emotionally taxing as well. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
How are you have done all this great work? How are you going to get it out there? What's the plan as far as publishing the results and findings go?
Yeah. Well, this was a great opportunity, obviously, doing the podcast. So this will be, this is my first time having this opportunity. I think it's something that I really would love to incorporate with future researchers. I think it's a great way to get the research out to more of the people and not just academia, if you will.
Sure.
Obviously, we're going to have so many analyses to go through. So you're going to be hearing about this research for a number of years, probably. 160 participants.
A lot of work went into it. Might as well.
160 participants, a little over 200 variables for each, 2 hours of interviews, all of it audio recorded.
For each participant, 200 variables. Wow, okay.
And that's not including like movement data that records every second for 45 minutes.
Oh, wow. And where the eyes were looking. And
where the eyes are. So there's so many interesting research questions that can be birthed from this after we get through our, we had the 2 studies designed to answer 2 very specific questions. That's what's going to be the heft of the work right now. And then you can get to the exploration of the data in other ways. So I really want to make sure to take the time to get everything right. I don't want to rush anything. I don't want to oversell or undersell. I think that's also very important. But you'll have the traditional avenues of academic publications, academic conferences, but I'm also this year returning back to the prisons that I worked with to give presentations on kind of the results to the prison staff that helped me.
You actually will return as well.
Yeah.
To the prisoners as well, or not so?
We haven't organized it. I could see potential ethical concerns with that.
Okay.
The ethical concerns would almost be my own because that wasn't a possibility that I told the inmates
that wasn't included in the
and I could see for some inmates
consent, basically.
I could see for some inmates that they wouldn't necessarily like a direct quote that they could identify as their own being displayed to other inmates.
Sure. Okay.
But that's it's a possibility, but I would have to consider it along kind of.
But I think it's very interesting that you're going to go back to the prisons. Was that also something that you had planned from the get-go?
Yeah. So approximately February of last year is when I started having the first meetings with the prison. So to kind of give a timeline, that was February of 2022. I didn't go to America and didn't start in the first prison until June 27th, 2022. So February to June is all administration planning. Okay. And even back in February when we were having the first meetings with the prison, we were already saying, we'll come back and let you know what the results are. Yeah, so that's going to be the avenues. And perhaps in the long run, a book kind of summarizing everything, including the things that we've talked about today that are just like how to build up rapport, the balancing act between the relationship with the guards and the inmates, all that stuff. Because I think that's something that, at least when I was designing the project, I found was limited in the literature, kind of a best of practice when it comes to these things. Now, there's loads of information on how to conduct an interview. one-on-one, multiple stop, but there's not a lot of information on how to get a CO, correctional officer, to like you.
Okay.
But not too much.
Yeah, that's right, but not too much. Yeah, sure. Okay. I was joking with our sound technician, Ingo, before that it sounds like it's worthy of a documentary. We could, next time you do this, because it's really interesting to find out how, we always talk about the findings and whatnot, but this is actually also what's totally interesting is the way you conducted these research in the first place. And it's not something where one has an everyday kind of account of something like this going on. So
and I think oftentimes, especially as, again, technology advancing, allowing us to do these huge national surveys, we kind of get distanced from what it means to collect data. If we are used to, in our field, clicking a button to make a survey go live and then watching the results pour in, versus it took me 2 hours to get this one participant. Mm-hmm. It's a very different mindset you have when you design your studies.
Yeah. That's right. Cool. Patrick, thank you so much for coming in. I really, really enjoyed our discussion today. And all the very best with your future research plans. And
thank you very much, Chris.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to today's program. If you would like to hear additional podcasts or learn more about our research, please visit our website at www.csl.mpg.de.